Welcome to Ask a Therapist, a show where qualified therapists stop by to answer all your questions. Hey you, welcome to the very first episode of Ask a Therapist. We put together this show at Legally Clueless Africa to give you a chance to ask qualified therapists questions around wellness, healing, trauma, all the things that we navigate as we try to be our best selves. My name is Adele Onyango and I'll be your host. For the first season, we brought on Daisy. She's the founder of ConvoCare, which is an organization here in Kenya dedicated to providing quality therapy. It was born around the COVID times when Daisy noted that there was a super need for physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual support. And trust me, we noted that too while we were cooped up in our houses. Now, ConvoCare offer various therapy services like tension release, child and adolescent counseling, adult counseling, and individual therapy, online therapy, group counseling, couples therapy, corporate counseling, psychometric testing, and they create really informative content around mental health on their social media platform, as well as do a lot of mental health advocacy work. To book a therapy session with ConvoCare, all you have to do is call the number 0703 975 216. But of course, if you're not in Kenya, in the show notes, we've put their email address and their Instagram page as well, because as I mentioned, they also do online therapy. Now, for this show, we will purely be relying on your questions to ask a therapist. So there's a question form in our show notes for you to drop your question and then listen in to the therapist answering them. It's as simple as that. And now let's get right into answering all your questions. So welcome to the first episode of Ask a Therapist.
Yeah.
Daisy, it's really great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, you're always like one of our go-tos whenever we need to understand something. I think the last time you came was on our flagship podcast for the hyper independence episode, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And so now we have tons of questions that we're going to get through in this first season. And so one of the questions that we got was, how do childhood traumas manifest in intimate relationships? That's a big one, because I realize that it does manifest in my own relationships. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yes. So the first or the primary relationship that we ever have as human beings is the relationship that we have with our parents. And usually it affects or is a mirror to every other relationship that we have, including friendships and romantic relationships. So it is possible that childhood trauma will manifest in your romantic relationships in these ways. Number one, emotional regulation, where you find yourself unable to regulate yourself emotionally in the relationship. Codependency, where your emotions depend on your partners. So you find yourself codependent. The attachment styles, unsecure attachment styles, or even secure attachment styles usually stem from our childhood. And so for unsecure attachment styles, they come from childhood trauma. So how you attach to your primary caregiver is sometimes how you find yourself attaching to your romantic partner. So for example, the anxious attachment style is a result of an abandonment wound, where you felt abandoned or neglected as a child, and therefore this is a constant feeling you have even in relationships. You're afraid that at some point you're going to be left, and therefore you become clingy. So these are some of the ways that childhood trauma does manifest in relationships, and it is important that you notice it and be able to deal with it.
What do you mean by, let's go back to like codependency. What does that kind of look like? What do you mean by that?
So your emotions depend on your partner's emotions. So you depend on them to regulate your emotions. So for example, you're sad, but for you to get through that emotion, you have to depend on your partner for it.
Okay. So does it also work in the reverse of like, I can only be happy if my partner
Is happy.
Yes. I can only be happy if my partner does A, B, C, D.
Yes.
Does it also work in the event of like, if my partner is sad, immediately I think it's me.
Because of me, yes. So you end up personalizing, developing this unhealthy thinking pattern where everything, external events are personal attacks or rejection. So anything to do with your partner affects you. If they're happy, then you're happy. If they're sad, then it means it could be because of you, and so you become sad as well.
All of this from your childhood trauma.
From your childhood.
This is hectic. Okay, maybe we can expand on the attachment styles. How many different attachment styles are there?
Okay, so there are two. There's the secure and the unsecure attachment styles. And then now under the unsecure, there are three. There's the anxious, there's the avoidant, and the fearful avoidant. Yeah.
And so we want everybody to work towards being secure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question we got was, what necessitates you having to cut off family? When do you know it's time to cut them off?
Nice question. Nice question. So it could be difficult to make this decision because our families are dear to us, and because by virtue of birth, where we were born, we feel connected to them. But when it gets abusive or toxic, it is important that you separate yourself. So this is individual based. Everybody should be able to make this decision on their own. However, if there is constant harm or abuse, and I'd like to define abuse. Abuse is when it is done intentionally and over time, over and over again, when someone uses power over you to cause harm over time and does it over and over again. Now that is when you term it as abuse. And then when there's constant harm, and then there's disrespect, where you find yourself disrespected from time to time and your boundaries are not respected, then you could decide to cut your family off for your peace. Also, if it affects your mental health, you find that when you're around your family, either you're triggered, you find yourself with anxiety or getting into depression, then it could be time to, just take time off from your family.
What does phase one of going no contact or cutting them off look like?
Okay. So communication, number one. A boundary is only broken if it has not been communicated. So if you find that you have not communicated your boundaries, then it is very easy for people to break them. So the first step is to communicate. And I usually tell my clients that you communicate most importantly for yourself. The other person benefits, but you communicate first off for yourself. So first off, communicate. See if they are not following your boundaries or respecting your boundaries. And then now try and physically put yourself away from the family, looking for events where you feel you'll get triggered and avoiding them. And then now if that doesn't work, then you can completely go no contact. However, it's important that you do this with support, because as you do that, you can go through grief. Yeah,
I was gonna say, what feelings come out after you go no contact?
Yeah. So just like any other lost connection, any connection that you lose, you go through grief. And we grieve out of love. Despite the fact that this person harmed you, there's a possibility that you genuinely cared for them and loved them. So you could go through grief, and grief does have stages. And so it is important that you seek support as you at it. Yeah.
So it's the same grieving or the same steps as if someone has died.
Yes.
Third question, which is the final question for this episode.
Yeah.
Why do people end up with partners who are just like their parents? This is so like, oh my goodness. It's coming too close to home, please.
Yeah. So just like I said, the first ever relationship that we have is that we have with our parents, or the primary caregiver could be a guardian. And so it is a mirror to our other relationships. And having a mother wound or a father wound could affect how we relate with other people. And so it is possible that people end up with partners who are similar to their parents. One, because trauma could be familiar. So you could find yourself looking for, subconsciously, of course, not consciously, looking for people who are similar to the trauma you went through. Also, because that was the first relationship, it was modeled to you, and therefore you learned that this is how relationships should be, and therefore you go looking for that same role model. Also, because of the attachment styles, because of what you experienced as a child, it is possible for you to be looking for or attach in an insecure way, and therefore finding yourself attaching to someone who is similar to your parent or your guardian.
And so, like, when you identify that you are kind of, let's say, if it's the first option, that you're seeking the trauma that you knew, right? How do you break that pattern?
Okay. First off, because it is subconscious, sometimes it's very hard to notice, and therapy does help you to point this out. When you work with your therapist, they can be able to help you notice what exactly you could be carrying from your past. Also, practicing the healing journey, so that you can be able to heal from the trauma that you had, so that you approach relationships while you're aware. When something happens, you are self-aware and can be able to notice that this is happening, and either communicate to your partner or do whatever is necessary in that time. Yeah.
Should you break up with someone if you realize that you got in because they were carrying this trauma that is familiar to you? Is breaking up a thing that you should think about doing?
Not in all situations. You actually need to assess what it is. Is it that the relationship is unhealthy? Is it just that there is conflict that can be worked on? Because sometimes we break up, yet it's just a conflict that can actually be worked on.
All right. So there's hope.
There is hope.
What a wonderful first episode, learning about everything from attachment styles to cutting off family and what comes with that, as well as why we pick intimate partners who are very similar to our parents. How hectic. But knowledge is power. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember, if you want to send in questions for our therapist to answer, this season our therapist is Daisy. There's a question form in our show notes. Click the link, pop in your question, and listen in for the answer. Also, if you want to book a one-on-one session with Daisy, or you're interested in all the other services and dope things her organization ConvoCare does, to book a session, just dial 0703 975 216. That's if you're in Kenya. They do online therapy as well. So in the show notes, we have put their email address as well as their Instagram page. That's all for this episode. If you have a question to ask a therapist, please drop it in our question form. A link to it is in the show notes. Catch you next week for the next episode of Ask a Therapist.